Good evening, everyone. We are about to have a very, very knowledgeable person come on to talk about all things gin. We're going to have Tash McGill, who is one of the, I would say, most informative and knowledgeable spirits writers and people in New Zealand. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Tash for a very long time. So please bear with me while we do the technical element of it. So what we're going to go through today, just so you know, is basically a 101 of gin. The beauty of that is that we've had so many questions come through asking about, how to have what makes a gin, what kind of changes it all through, and what to be able to, really enjoy it, and the different types of gin in New Zealand, etc. So I think we have a Tash McGill requesting to join. So yes, amazing, we do. I'm going to add her in. Hopefully this works. But yeah, it's going to be basically a run through of what we've got in New Zealand. Also a bit more about the different flavour profiles, what makes a gin. And yeah, it's going to be great. Oh, there she is. Yay.
After all that, did I join on the... Oh, no, I joined on the right account. Okay, good.
Yeah.
It gets complicated.
Incredible.
It gets complicated.
No, it's working though. It's brilliant. So it's, technical things can happen all the time. But thank you so much for joining us, Tash, and giving up your time to be and educate everyone on here. It's I really appreciate it for one. But first and foremost, I just want to basically thank you again. And also, if you want to just give us a bit of a rundown on your background and what you do. Personally, I've known you for a long time, back when I was a bartender, and even then, that was only a few, nearly. I don't want to say how many years ago, but
Let's not dwell.
I just wanted. No, that's okay. We've moved on from then. But yeah, just if you could give us a run through about who you are, what you do, and we could go on for about 15 minutes with everything you do in spirits in New Zealand. But I'll let you explain your background.
Sure. I mean, it's such an interesting. People ask me all the time, oh, like how did you get into this? What did you? And the reality is, I just found it fascinating. I found the world of spirits fascinating from a young age, and I had the opportunity. I'm just going to move this so that the light is slightly better. There we go. Yeah, and I had the opportunity to explore palate, thanks to my dad being involved in the wine industry for a little while. I had the opportunity to, I used to fill up the decanters for our Thursday and Friday night drinks when my mum would have like her boss and colleagues over. And from there, I just was fascinated by how good everything tasted and how wonderful it smelled, and the idea that you could create such wonderful experience people over a drink. And I think hospitality is at the heart of it for me. That's where it starts. It's not about sitting down to have an amazing drink alone. It's actually about sitting down to share an experience. Yeah. Whether it's and I do this all the time. I love to go sit at a bar and to sit and have a drink with the bartender, because sometimes that's the most interesting conversation, and just to watch the world go by and people. So that was where it started. When I was about 21, 23, I kind of realized, oh, I don't just have to drink like Grants, Ballantines, like
off the well. There's more to life. Yeah.
Well, and partly that's because my stepdad was a pilot, so he drank whatever the rations were, So we were a house that grew up on blended whiskey, but I realized I could learn and explore and try a bunch of different things and figure out what I liked. So I kind of went down this path of exploring and found a couple of great places where I would just soak up knowledge from whoever had something who knew something I didn't know. I would just try and learn that, and then I would keep going and keep reading and keep asking. And then it was kind of coincidence that as this complete other thing, I worked in strategy and communications and writing. And the way I love to tell the story is that if I used to write for the Herald, but about like business and property. Right, like boring. But a friend of mine had a column that was a booze column, and he was going away on holiday, needed someone to fill in, suggested that I could fill in to the editor, and so I wrote my first booze column, and he never got the column back. And it's okay, we're still friends, but I got this opportunity to keep writing. And then I was like, oh, communicating about spirits is really interesting, because the opportunity to not just accumulate knowledge, but to share that knowledge with other people and then improve their drinking experiences, hopefully, as a result, is something awesome. And one of the things that I talk about all the time is, I think a philosophy for me is that I want for us all to drink. I want us to not, and that's not a statement about drinking less or drinking low alcohol or drinking no alcohol. It's actually just about, let's drink better. Let's be better drinkers who know and choose very intentionally what we consume. Let's be more informed. Let's understand the craft that we are engaging with. And so from there have come these opportunities to do more communication, to do more training, to do judging, to do consultation with brands and with industry, to work in that sort of business consultation side. I offer guidance to, a few different places. And so that's really been the evolution of my career. Never intentionally, I never set out to say, right, I want to be this person or be a spirits writer, or I want to be, I still sometimes get embarrassed and kind of go, no, you guys make the stuff. So actually you're more important. Who am I to judge what you make? But through the process of judging, which is really about assessment, right? It's about assessing and offering feedback. That's, again, it's one of the ways that we can make things better. So that's a little bit of my story, and probably nearly 15 minutes.
Hey, well, as I said, there's a lot more and that that you could definitely go into. But what you just said then about basically everyone drinking better, and that's kind of what our whole ethos is at Clink as well. There are so many amazing gin distilleries in New Zealand, and I think being able to work, I think the community is really strong as well. And I think we're by having people like you to be the voice and actually educate people. That's kind of obviously what I think is so beautiful about with what you do. So I think today what we're going to go through in a bit more detail, obviously, is start from the beginning. Let's just kind of touch base on about what makes gin? Like what's the basic things around it? And I think we've had a lot of questions about this. Most people grew up with things like Bombay Sapphire or something like that with a Schweppes tonic, etc., which is fantastic. But a lot of people they know they like the taste, and then just not knowing basically the basic around it. So it'd be awesome if you could just kind of give us an overview of how gin is made and what kind of constitutes an actual gin.
Oh, okay. So clearly starting with one of the really easy questions there, that's great. So one of the things that's so fascinating about gin, and I think it's a place where a lot of people start when they start their distilling journey, and they start because there's lots of different ways into making gin. So you can actually make gin by, there's a couple of different things that we talk about making compound gins, which are gins that might be a range of different neutral alcohols that have been then redistilled, steam distilled or vacuum distilled with additional botanicals to extract flavor. You can mix neutral alcohol with flavored syrups to create gins. There's a place and a space for that. Then there's the actual distilled gin, which is typically where you either make from scratch, so you do the fermentation and you distill the alcohol out to a neutral spirit or close to being a neutral spirit, and then you distill onto that. You either redistill or you use a gin, what they call a gin basket. You stack a bunch of botanicals into that and you distill, which is basically you take the raw ferment, we call it the wash, the raw ferment, which has and you heat that up super hot until all of the good alcohol, all of the alcohol kind of rises into these funny little steamy bubbles. It goes up the top of the still, and what we want to do is always kind of get rid of the bad ones. The bad ones come off first. We get rid of those. We take the beautiful flavor, we call them congeners. They carry the flavor particles that we like. We take those and then we get rid of the rest, and we redistill and we repurpose those. But that's effectively how a distilled gin works, and the way that we choose to add flavor. So we might infuse, we might steam distill. There's just lots and lots of different ways, and understanding some of those things can help you make more informed choices about the kinds of gin that you perhaps enjoy more than others, and also choices about price point and things like that.
Absolutely. So I guess when we kind of look at New Zealand as a market, what what is around here? So how does, what's kind of the rules and regulations and things like that for our New Zealand gin? Because I think it's very different here than other places in the world, potentially.
But yeah, I mean, so the gin market is super interesting because actually there are very, very few regulations or restrictions on how you make it, what ingredients you use to make it. In fact, even juniper. So that slightly piney, resinous-y, sometimes slightly bitter flavor that we all recognize as being, oh, that's gin, right? And there are a couple of different origin stories about that use of juniper as a botanical to flavor spirit. Some people will talk about the historical Geneva that was made with juniper berries. Other people just, talk about a few different origin pathways. But when we talk about that particular flavor, there's actually no international rule or regulation anywhere that says you must use this percentage of juniper or there must be this amount of it. It's actually just kind of the generally accepted practice that a classic gin will have a predominantly juniper backbone. So in New Zealand, we have a lot of gins being made in a classic style, but classic doesn't necessarily mean classic London Dry, which is that Bombay Sapphire that we're used to. It might mean simply a classic style of gin, which is juniper forward, but doesn't necessarily have what we call kind of the Holy Trinity or the traditional gin botanicals. So that's immediately where it starts to get complicated, because when you're looking at a couple of bottles on the shelf and you go, wait, but is this just like a New Zealand version of that Bombay Sapphire or that Gordon's or that, that thing that I'm used to drinking, or is it going to be totally different? Well, it's probably, if it says, and this is this is something I love, if it says London Dry or if it says classic gin, then that's usually a good indicator that it's going to be in that style of London Dry, which is juniper forward, but has a nice balance of citrus, usually lemon, and you're going to experience some of those botanicals like coriander, a few other bits and pieces like that. So that's kind of the backbone. But we also have, one of the things I like to say is that New Zealanders, like, there's one general rule when it comes to New Zealanders and flavours. You've probably heard me say it before, and that is most Kiwis genuinely, like, if you ask them what they're drinking or what they like, big, bold, strong. Can't be wrong. We love big, bold flavours. We love Merlot. We love Sauvignon Blanc. We love things that are just like bam and smack you in the face. So New Zealanders do also really love flavoured gin.
Yeah.
We love it in a big way. So then the question is, how do we get to those flavors? Because there is a pathway of, and there are quite a few gins in the market that are made with flavor houses that work to combine flavors, orange, lime, citruses, rhubarb, rose. There's lots and lots of different ways that we can take those flavors that we love and then put them into gin. And it's not uncommon for, because we can buy whey ethanol, which is that wonderful leftover product from our incredible dairy industry. We can buy that kind of cheap. We can compound it with some flavor syrup and we can get it to market really quick. So there is quite a bit of that. But there are also infused and distilled flavored gins that are really quite unique and incredible. So we've got a lot of that going on. And then we've got our contemporary gins. And sometimes in a contemporary gin, you might not even be able to taste juniper, because depending on the gin it might not even have juniper in it.
Yeah.
It might
have, I was going to ask that. Yeah.
It might have other ingredients that are similar to or represent that piney, resinous-y kind of flavor, but in a slightly different way, and sometimes in a very unique New Zealand way.
Yeah. Definitely. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't realize the actual complexity with a lot of the different distillers here. And I think, but that's one of the beauties, I think, of New Zealand gin, is that there is so much. There's so much variety, and we've got such incredible, unique botanicals too that people can add to things. So I think, like, what we do at Clink is try and we do a lot of research. It's tough sometimes trying gins and, having to do that all the time, as you can imagine. But it's about finding ones that, but it's about finding ones that actually, have the flavor profile that kind of is quite, you're right. A lot of people like strong gins, but also I think the other thing as well is if you are going to get a more delicate gin or something like that, it's about the importance of matching it with the right tonic or the right mixer as well. And I think a lot of times people will get something and try it with their, you know, their old school Schweppes or whatever, and go, oh God, that's not good. So I guess I just want to lean into a bit more about the different kind of styles of gin and kind of general, I guess, flavor profiles as well, just so people, and then kind of if you want to go into that, like if you've got a floral gin, what that would match with and things like that, just in a general way.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the interesting things about matching, particularly with gin, is that it is so subjective to what you like.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And having a good sense of your own palate is great, you know. And I think, you know, we've probably all been in that circumstance where somebody says, oh, no, I don't like sweet. I don't like sweet. I don't like sweet. And then you get, you know, so you give them a gin that's maybe on the very kind of citrus, earthy, you know, very, very citrus driven, very earthy, very astringent, perhaps might be a word I've occasionally used to describe a gin. And they go, oh, no. I like gins that have rhubarb and they have plum and they have, you know, all those sorts of things. So having a good understanding of your own palate is always a really good place to start. But that question, that I love that question around, like, okay, so if you're drinking a floral gin, what does it work well to pair with? There are a couple of, and one of the things I think is great actually about the Clink flavor wheel is that it's helpful for navigating some of this. A floral gin still will have, and it's that difference of understanding what's happening in the nose versus the palate, and then how things start and how they finish might not always be exactly the same. So for me and my palate, a floral gin, which will have notes like rose and may have notes like lavender, it might have even like lemon myrtle, where, you know, it has kind of that sense of you're walking through a garden. It has, you know, I tasted a great gin the other day that has basil and nettle in it, and so it really does kind of smell like you're walking through a cottage garden on a summer's day. It's quite beautiful. There's a certain softness, a certain sweetness, and a certain vegetal note, actually, to a lot of those floral gins. So when I think about breaking that down into how is that going to taste, even though it might smell like grandma's bathroom cabinet in the first instance, occasionally a great floral gin may have that slight note of lavender. It might smell like it, but it's not going to taste like it, right? So what you're going to taste is more of that. You're often going to taste a little bit more of that vegetal note. It might smell sweet, but it's possibly not going to taste sweet. And so I love to then think about how do I balance that nose. I do have a few favorite tonics that I go to. I do love a Mediterranean tonic that has a little bit of that that kind of vegetal citrus pop. I love to use a Mediterranean tonic for a floral gin, and I'm also a fan of some of those lighter styles. The other thing is that I wish more people were just brave enough to just go, actually, gin and soda is phenomenal. It's a really great way to let gin sing. And again, this comes back to the style of gin that we make in New Zealand. There are two, even amongst all of those categories, right? So there's classic, contemporary, classic London. We do, you know, Navy strength. We do contemporary New Zealand ingredients. All of those different things. And amongst all of that, there are also two other categories that sit across all of it, which is that we make some very simple, straightforward, you know, 4 to 5 botanical combination gins. And then we also have some gins that are packed with botanicals, like 15, 16 botanicals. And when you have that amount of botanical flavor going on, ask yourself the question, do you actually need tonic with that? Man, give that some soda. Let the gin do the work, because there's so much flavor to be explored in it. And a lot of the time, you know, that thing that we love about gin and tonic is often the sugar that's in the tonic.
Yes. And do you know how many people have actually, I've said the sugar content of some, like, look, tonic's great, but I think a lot of the time people don't realize actually the impact it can have on it too, you know, in terms of the flavor. So yeah, it's it's a fun thing. And look, I'm a soda girl. I love it because I just like to make the gin kind of shine. And I think, you know, obviously we've been lucky enough to, you know, we've got some amazing, you know, mixers here in New Zealand. Like we've done a lot of stuff with the East Imperial guys, and you know they've got such a big range for that reason too, to
The
be able to
Royal
make sure that we're
Botanical. Ah, it's
less. Yeah,
it's so good. And
I
I
know.
don't know, but did you have a chance to try their Christmas tonic, which
We
is a
did. We had it in
rhubarb
our
and ginger?
November box.
Oh,
Yeah,
great! That
amazing.
was genius. So good.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so much variety. I'm going to try and harass those guys to come on here and educate people that as well, because I think there's so much going on that people don't realize. Again, I hate to say the Schweppes one, but that's what we all grew up with, right? Or even before that. But and it's something that what I love about New Zealand now, what we do in Clink every month is that we will have, if we're focusing on a region, we'll do a bit of a guide around where you can enjoy gin. So for me, as you know, I was a bartender for a long time, but I learned how to really enjoy gin from other bartenders. So going into a place, and now there's so many more of boutique New Zealand gins in some bars, well, you know, a lot of the more boutique bars. If you're not sure, and that's why we do that, go in and sit down. There are some amazing people in this country who know their stuff, and get them to educate you on your palate, you know. And and I guess, like, for you, what are some of your favorite spots in New Zealand to go and get a good gin cocktail, or to kind of enjoy a gin and soda, or whatever it may be? I know this is, you know,
I could
we
get in
have like
trouble
the
here.
next.
I could get in trouble here if I forget anyone. Or if I don't.
Okay. Let's give 3 examples, and then it's going to like narrow it down.
Okay. So if you love some people just they're a fan of gin and they love drinking gin and they love a gin and tonic, they love a gin and soda. I think, like gin and Christchurch, kind of all good. I think the Churchill in Auckland, which is at the top of 4 Points, a great selection of great gins, and their 10 by 10 menu, their 10 by 10 by 10 is awesome. You can, they have a list of 10 gins, a list of 10 tonics, a list of 10 garnishes. You can pick and choose, mix and match. And then they have their whole back bar that you can work with as well. So if you really just want to explore gin, then that's pretty awesome. If you love a gin cocktail, right? And so, because that's me. My mode of drinking gin, almost primarily, if I'm not drinking gin and soda, will be gin cocktails. Then I think, then definitely Hawthorn Lounge in Wellington, Clipper in Auckland, Deadshot or Caretaker. Those are places that would be my go-to. And Nelson, Kismet. For sure. And then the other thing is, like, actually there's just a bunch of great distillery tasting rooms that you can go to and taste great gin and tonic pairings. And if you really are curious about gin, that's often a great place to go, because you get so much more familiar with the process of making it and why they're making it in a certain way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think a lot of people, you know, obviously in New Zealand, they're used to going to the vineyards and doing wine tasting, and not many people realize that you can actually go to a lot of these distillers. I was down in Queenstown recently. We went to Cadrona. You know, I was in Hastings recently, Hastings Distillery, and the good thing is most of the time you've got the distiller there, and you've also, so you can get there a full education around, you know, and why they're actually, where the inspiration came from, what they did, and all of this stuff in these places as well. They might have their heritage, but there'll be really limited runs that basically you won't get anywhere else. And I think if you've got that opportunity to go, absolutely go. So it's incredible. I think the other thing as well I want to just kind of cover is just around I think we've got the alcohol percentage, like ABV of gin. So what's the 101? What do you have to make a gin in New Zealand, or is there anything? You know, let's go through that.
So 37.5% ABV is the minimum. So for a gin, if it's less than 37.5, so maybe it's a 35%. That's going to be classified as a gin liqueur. It's had added sugar to it. But that's kind of the baseline. It's got to have added sugar, and a lot of it, which might taste good. But yeah, and some of my favorite actual gin products at the moment are actually classified as gin liqueurs. I am, if anybody me for the last couple of years, Summertime comes around, they just get fizzy. For the Hayman peach and rose. It's just delicious. I'm like, yep, I will just drink that all day long. And also, you know, some slow gins on the market are actually gin liqueurs by definition, just because of the sugar and the ABV. So it's got to be, but to be a gin, it's got to be 37.5%. Lots of people, and this happens across the spirits world. So can I have a wee soapbox moment?
Absolutely. I think this is all very interesting.
So we soapbox moment, and again, it's a little bit of that, hey, big, bold, strong, can't be wrong attitude. Is a lot of New Zealanders, when they're looking at spirits, they do this terrible, terrible triangulation between ABV, which is alcohol by volume, so the percentage that it says, the price point, and the size of the bottle. And they try and create an equation in their head between those three things that either represents quality or value. Yeah. And that math does not work. It's never going to work, not in 1,000 years, right? So no, we don't do that math. Some people will say, oh, it's, you know, if it's going to be a gin, you know, I only like drinking 46% gin. That's just all that ABV is a representation of what the distiller thought it tasted at, like how it tasted best, right? Now, the reality is that quite often, at a 46% alcohol percentage, if that gin hasn't been made with absolute attention to detail of the balance of botanicals, the treatment of botanicals, like, let's talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
Because if you really are wanting to pay attention to, is this a good quality gin? You are not paying attention to the ABV. You are not paying attention to the price point, and you are certainly not paying attention to what the botanical blend is. You are going to be paying attention to how did they treat those botanicals, what was the distillation technique that they used. But so when it comes to ABV, anywhere between 40 and 46% is going to be pretty standard. Most gins are going to sit at 40 to 43, unless it's a Navy strength gin. Navy strength gin traditionally was like 50, 51, 52%, sometimes 55, sometimes 58. But nowadays you will see gins sitting at 48% ABV and labeled as Navy strength. Navy strength, again, it's one of those, it's kind of one of those beautiful pieces of mythology out of drinking culture that we kind of pull through, but actually it never really had strict rules around it. Mostly it just meant it was not proofed at all, almost, in some instances. So yeah, so that's where you start to see some of those differences. But yeah, when it comes to ABV, the key is to look for balance and to look for drinkability. If it's got a big hot alcohol burn, that doesn't mean it's good. If it's got a big hot alcohol burn, you're probably missing half of the botanicals that are in there, you know, which is, again, it's like, but if that's not alcohol burn, if that's pepper, if it's a note of spice from something that's been included, then paying attention to how that acts and operates differently on the palate will help you to have a more informed drinking experience and hopefully a better time.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that. Like, basically, some of the gin liqueurs and stuff like that, you're right, from a seasonal perspective, they're amazing. And I think a lot of people kind of dismiss it. And when they think about that, don't want to say the younger, or like, you know, when you're younger, you maybe are looking at, hey, how drunk can I get? It kind of changes it potentially when you're a bit older to go. And, you know, there are some amazing things out there. And again, I think it's about getting into some of these distilleries or some amazing bars and going for it. Like, I remember the first time I had a proper martini. Like, I had martinis, but I hadn't had a one that was balanced with the right gin. It was down at Sweet Bar actually many years ago, and it blew my mind. And then I had a few more of them after a while. But it's definitely about getting the right education and getting people who know how to make things. It's, you know, even if you're a little bit out in terms of when you're making a cocktail and you've put a bit too much in, it can completely throw it off. So I think there's such an element in that. And I just want to kind of jump into, so you mentioned Navy strength. Let's talk about a bit more of the other kinds of gins, obviously like Plymouth and things like that, and what makes them and what the differences, because I think a lot of people don't even know I think London Dry, and that's
well, the Plymouth gin, and this is where I probably recap checked to make sure I'm going to get all the facts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the generality of the story,
totally,
which is that, you know, much in the same way that London Dry was London Dry, It wasn't really because there was a strict recipe. It was just that was the style in which they were making it, and there was a certain type of still that was being used to make that kind of gin, and that's kind of how we roll. Very similarly with Plymouth gin. Plymouth is a place, and they had a particular style of making gin, and then somebody got really clever, and they thought, you know what the French do? The French create these regional designations around where wine is and what that is and who can make it and how it can be made. We should do that for Plymouth gin. And so that is basically what they did. They created a regional designation around Plymouth gin. But funnily enough, there's only just the one Plymouth gin brand now in the world, and it's called Plymouth gin. And so when you say, oh, can I get a Plymouth gin? You're just asking for a brand. That's
there
it.
you go. Yeah. But these are the things that a lot of people don't know. Like we literally had these questions where people are asking, you know, what's the difference between that and is it a style? And you know, it's important to know this. And then you mentioned slow gin before. Let's talk a bit about that, because obviously it's a little bit different than your traditional flavour of a London Dry. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah. So slow gin, so the slow berry, occurs in lots of places out in the wild, but also can be farmed, and particularly in the UK is where it was, you know, is kind of where it has its moment. And so slow gin was, again, the process of taking a bunch of slow berries, dousing them with gin, soaking them, the flavour, you know, and not quite macerating, but soaking, which basically creates infusion. Occasionally you might add sugar to it, or you might not, but that's essentially, that's the most simple version of talking about how you make a slow gin, is by infusing those berries. And so there are some applications of that that we see, similar infusion techniques that we might use in certain instances, say of using damps and plums. There are, you know, some, and that's kind of where I was talking about, like the treatment of botanicals and ingredients. Each ingredient, each botanical, they're not all equal in terms of how they like to be treated. So some respond to heat better than others. Some respond to low, slow, gentle extraction, and so they need to be treated more gently than others. There are some distilleries, and here in New Zealand, that actually distill each botanical individually based on how it best needs to be treated in order to extract the best flavour and not damage the quality of the flavour. And then they blend the gin at the end from each of those individual botanicals being treated in the way, or prepared in the way that they best suit. So, you know, that's one of the things. I mean, slow gin is kind of a cool, if you go all the way back and you kind of dive into the storytelling. A lot of gin, when gin was first made, we didn't have great stills, and so it was difficult to distill alcohol to the certain kind of purity that is best fit for human consumption. And so sometimes, you remember I was talking in the beginning about how it is being made, you know, we take the cut, and the heart cut is really important, because the heads are a bit naff, but the feints are really terrible, or the tails are really, really terrible. And if you sometimes taste a gin or any spirit, and you think, oh, it's a bit sulfury, or it's a little bit petrol-y, or it smells a little industrial, but not in a good way, because, you know, sometimes sometimes, you know, gas smells really good to me and delicious. but if it smells, you know, industrial or in a not good way, often that's a sign, particularly if you are dealing with craft distillers who sometimes, not always, but particularly in New Zealand, where our industry is growing, we have some incredibly skilled people, but we also have a lot of people who are diving into it for the first time. And so they're learning as they go, and they don't always get it right, and they're distilling on small stills, and they're distilling in small batches. And so sometimes, you know, a batch may not be consistent from woe to go. So bringing that back to slow gin, that has been true since days gone by, because now we've got great technical tools and equipment that we can use to be like, oh yes, at this percentage, this would be great. You know, for centuries of distilling, people have relied on their noses and their taste buds to tell them, you know, where it's about right. And some people used to just time it and go, oh yeah, when the still's been running for this long, I'll switch it off. So the chance for error, terrible. If you get a bad gin and it smells foul and disgusting, what do? Just soak some fruit in it and trust that the fruit will give you some sugar and some sweetness and some tartness, and it will cover up the bad bits. And then that's kind of, you know, that's one of the ways actually that liqueurs also have developed and emerged over time. The alcohol might not be great, but if you chuck some fruit in it.
Yeah, let's just cover that up. But you're right, and I think the beauty of now, like, I guess the age now, we've got the internet, for good or bad. Obviously, there's a lot of misinformation as well, but I think it's just definitely allowed it to progress in terms of people being able to, which is exciting at the same time.
Yeah.
Again, I touched on before that the community in New Zealand, I really think something special. Like being at Gindulgence Auckland last year and just seeing the distillers supporting each other, and you know, having that amazing. I don't feel like it's a competition kind of thing. There's a space for everyone. I really, really appreciate that, and you see a lot of support online as well. And I guess there's a couple more things I want to cover. One is the importance of garnishes, and I think when it comes to that, there's, you know, people just don't consider it sometimes. So I want to kind of just maybe get your thoughts on that, and how it can definitely maybe enhance or change a drink.
Well, like, we can't treat drinks or the drinking experience as a 1 or 2 dimensional thing, right? It's not just taste. In fact, 90% of what we taste is actually about what we smell, right? That's like, and anybody who's had COVID and experienced that kind of terrible side effect knows what I'm talking about. So 90% of what we taste is actually what is coming through our olfactory senses. But sight is also a really important part of that. And texture is a really important part of that. And so when we're making a great drink, and you would know this even better than I, when we're making a great drink, we think about things like the temperature, we think about the texture of the beverage, we think about the balance of the beverage, how does it act upon the tongue in the beginning, how does it finish on the tongue, what does that do, what is the length of it, and what is the roundness or the fullness of the shape of it, and each of those elements is influenced by the ingredients that we use. In the same way, the garnish that we use on a drink, a garnish flavor, or it can take away from flavor. So, you know, for example, an orange peel that hasn't had the pith appropriately removed, if it sits in a Negroni or it sits in a sour for too long, is actually going to have a negative impact on the drink, because the bitterness of the pith is going to actually start extracting into the beverage. So there's a real skill in creating garnishes. That being said, you know, garnishes sometimes can get a little bit wild and wacky, and there's a big sustainability question around, you know, little pink umbrellas. Death to the pink umbrella, but long live the edible garnish. One of the things that I love about
I wouldn't even classify that. Like, we don't need the 80s pina coladas kind of thing, you know. It's
no.
You know, I think there's also, like, we've got, obviously, you know, we do a lot of work in, you know, the guys from Parched as well. There's a lot of good New Zealand garnish options out there, and it's not just, as you said, putting an umbrella in it, etc. Like, again, back to the martini. You put, you know, you've got your twist lemon. It's very different to a Gibson when you've got, you know, beautiful onions in it. You know, a lot of people don't realize the difference that can create, but
yeah,
it's so important. And it's the texture. It's the on the nose, everything, and it makes such a difference. It can change the whole drink completely.
Yeah. So, you know, it's an invitation into the visual experience of the drink. So the garnish needs to be relevant to what's happening in the glass or what's happening to the rest of that drinking experience. I love a mince pie old fashioned. They come out once a year at a bar in Ponsonby, and they're served with an actual mince pie. And I will tell you that the buttery flakiness of that pastry and the richness of that kind of, you know, mince fruit filling just works magically with that old fashioned in that moment, right? So it needs to relate to the story of the drink. It needs to add to the drink, but it also needs to not take away from the drink. And I think it should be part of the experience, which kind of brings me to, if it can be edible, then I think that's awesome. So I've had some really beautiful drinks that have been served with whole kawa berries on top of the ice, and that's inedible to me, and it just kind of breaks my heart, because I'm like, that feels like a waste of what could be a beautiful ingredient. So don't serve me that on that's wastage. And you know, and I love seeing one of the things I you know, and I'll say about parched, one of the things that I really enjoy about the parched garnishes is that they're all edible. Like, and they actually taste really good. And I have occasionally been known to find myself snacking on a piece of their dehydrated pineapple because it's actually delicious.
Yeah, yeah,
So as much as possible, a garnish should be integrated and part of the drinking experience, and it shouldn't. Preferably, it should add minimal waste and preferably no waste to the drinking experience.
yeah. I totally agree.
But also,
All right, well, I've got one more thing.
garnishes.
Yeah. Yeah, and more relevant garnishes, right? So
Yeah.
I think, let's get rid of the umbrella, leave that in the 80s. We'll move forward to, fresh, local things that actually you can consume. I think that's really important. So just to finish up, I think this is a really busy month in Ginland in New Zealand. So obviously we've got the Auckland Gin Festival this weekend. Gin Jubilee started with East Imperial. We've got, in March, we've got Gindulgence Christchurch. What's your favourite gin event? And is there anything else that you would recommend people to go to, or is it all of them? Or I'd love to get your 2 cents on that.
Sheesh. Look, here's my thing. I would probably frame it this way, which is that if you haven't been to a gin festival, get to a gin festival. And take advantage of the opportunity to actually have conversations with some of the amazing distillers in our country.
Absolutely.
So rather than saying, hey, here's my favorite, I just think get to one and try something different when you go to them. I am probably always going to be a proponent of, so I'm going to the Auckland Gin Festival tomorrow. And my plan of attack is to go in early as soon as doors open when energy is high, and to have just so that I can take as much time as I need in that session to try and have a conversation with just about everyone. But I won't be drinking every sample because I'm going to be paying attention to what are the ones that are what samples are there that either I haven't tasted before, are presenting something different, or an ingredient that I haven't met or been introduced to before. And I think the way we approach some of those events is really important. Other than that, I also think it's great for people to think about celebrating things like Gin Jubilee, not just in the context of how they go out, but also how they go home. And so thinking about, hey, what's something that you can add to your cabinet at home, either by way of a new tonic or a new mixer or a new cocktail recipe that you can try, or a new gin that you can bring home to your collection, because I think that's a really cool way of just expanding your interest. Because the great thing about gin festivals is that you get to try an awful lot of different gins. The worst thing about gin festivals is that you try so many different gins and you don't necessarily get to sit and spend time with really getting to know a product. And one of my favorite things about getting the clink boxes is actually the fact that you go, oh yeah, so this gin has just arrived, and it's an opportunity to kind of focus on it for a month. Doesn't usually last a month, but it's a great opportunity. It's because I host parties, Katia. That's what happens. I host parties, people come over, I make cocktails, we drink the drinks. But I love that idea of being able to focus on one spirit and get to know it a little bit more and get to know those botanicals.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's really good advice. If you're there to learn and be educated, go early, because not everyone is at these events to sample new things. A lot of people go to indulge, and that's fine. But I guess if you're trying to learn, I'd go sooner than later, so you're not competing with a lot of different people on the stands. And also, the other thing too, like Gin Jubilee, if people don't know about it, it's run by East Imperial. But the cool thing about that is it's a cocktail competition as well. So there are so many amazing people across New Zealand that are super talented that you can basically go and educate yourself. You can go try them. So get out there too. As I said, it's not just the distillers. That's the first part, but go support your local bars. Go in there and educate yourself and basically have a good time. And you can go by yourself. I love going to having a drink by myself at some of these bars because you get to talk to some of the most amazing, knowledgeable people in the game. So anyway, Tash, if you could say one thing about, if you could give one piece of advice to finish up around gin in New Zealand, what would you say, or a little takeaway? On the spot.
Drink better. You have the opportunity to, so drink better. And how you drink better is by knowing what it is that you are choosing to consume, making really conscious choices about how to consume it in the way that suits that product the best. And you know, there aren't. I often say this, and then sometimes people say, yeah, but what about this? And I go, oh, no, I have to eat my words. But the reality is that there's very little truly terrible product that makes its way into a bottle, because every product that makes its way into a bottle is the product of somebody's time, energy, attention, care, and investment. It costs an awful lot to make spirits in this country. And so what I encourage people to do is to try spirits with curiosity, to try their gins with curiosity, to understand what is the story that is happening, what is the distiller trying to create, how have they done that, and how might I express that best with them, what I do with this product, whether it be a cocktail, a gin and soda, you know. And so I think that's probably my advice is choose to be a better consumer by getting informed, by understanding what you're drinking, and by understanding how the product's been made. You know, process, provenance, and presence are probably the three things that I really focus on when I'm trying to engage with a brand and understand it. You know, where has it come from? How has it been made? And has it been made with due diligence to process? And then what is the presence of it? What is the story that they're telling? And how is that being impactful?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, that's why we started Clink as well, was to kind of not just get gin out there. It's about educating and getting people to know more about the process. And, you know, we're going to be starting to interview a lot of the distillers that we're featuring in our boxes for that reason, you know, just to kind of get it from the horse's mouth and kind of go through and let them have their form. And I think it's really important. As you said, we've got in New Zealand to do this. So I think if you just support local, I think it's really, really important. And they're, you know, some of the most incredible, knowledgeable people are out there. And yeah, don't be afraid to try new things. It's worth it in the end. But Tash, thank you so much. And I guess, you know, like, if anyone's got any questions or they want to know more, I'd follow Tash, the Spirits right on this account, because trust me, you'll learn so much. And I really appreciate your time today, and have fun at the festival tomorrow. I hope you find some new gems. And yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, just always fun to chat, but especially fun to talk about something that we both love. And yeah, hopefully people have had a good time. And I love asking questions and having the banters. So, you know, come at me.
I'm doing that mince pie old fashioned with you next time. I'm thinking about that now, even though it's on the side of not gin, but it's still like, you know, even just hearing something like that, I'm like, that's incredible. So yeah, go out there, support your bartenders, support your distillers, and have some fun and drink better. Awesome. Well, have a great night, guys. And yeah, if you've got any further questions and things, please shoot them through to us. We'll do our best to answer them. Or if there's any other topics you want covered, we're going to do our best this year to make sure that everyone has the most knowledge possible and can enjoy everything New Zealand gin has to have. So thank you again, Tash, and have a good night. See you later.
See ya.